Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to IMNZ's Virtual Leadership Series. Now, Christine Watty is just finishing answering questions over in sessions, but here on the main stage, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Sinead Boucher. Now, Sinead began her career as a junior reporter at the Press in Christchurch, or actually North Canterbury, before working her way up to become CEO of the Stuff Media Group 3 years ago. But just 3 months ago, she completed a management buyout of the entire group for the grand sum of $1 from Australia's Nine Entertainment, effectively making her Stuff's brand new owner. Now, Sinead was one of the standout speakers at last week's summit, so here again is her pre-recorded presentation.
So thank you so much for joining us. It's lovely to have you here for this Leadership Summit, and a wonderful person to speak to about leadership, because obviously your own journey has been so comprehensive and extensive. Obviously starting out as a local reporter, I think in North Canterbury, then obviously into management, senior management, and now just a few weeks ago, a company owner and effectively entrepreneur. Extraordinary journey. I guess the first question is, how did those earlier roles help shape your approach to these big questions and what you're doing now?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you for that, Tristan. Well, I guess when I think back to those early years of my career, I certainly could never have looked ahead and plotted out how it's actually developed. I think it's probably true of most people's careers. I started out as a young reporter, and my ambition, the extent of my ambition, was to be a really good reporter, which is actually a very noble ambition for those of you, out there thinking about the world that we work in. It probably, we're at a time when the value of good journalism is more important than ever. I think, when I look back on those years as a reporter, journalists tend to think that that's the only thing they can do. But when I, have found myself in different leadership roles, going from being in a pure editorial type of area where the company is deliberately constructed to keep you away from any commercial considerations, to becoming first an executive editor and then the chief executive, initially I felt probably unprepared for that kind of broadening out, or felt I would be unprepared for it because I didn't have that traditional business background. But I learned that one of the key things, or a couple of the key things that came out of being a journalist, was that ability to ask questions. And I certainly ask a lot of questions, but also to kind of listen, to take a lot of information, to be able to pass it down and try and draw out the kind of key themes, the most important themes. And as a journalist, you have to learn to become a good communicator. You have to be able to listen to people and talk them out. I think those skills have stood me in good stead, as has, I think, the habits I developed early on of becoming a really broad reader. Now, listener or watcher, and trying to expose myself to a variety of views, other perspectives, learn about areas which were not my area of expertise. And that's given me now, I think, a good platform as a leader.
You mentioned it there briefly, and it's something that's come through in some of the interviews regarding the big deal a few weeks ago. But you're quite open about some of your emotions. I mean, I remember regarding your purchase of stuff recently, you said it was quite overwhelming, I heard you say once, and exciting, and you used a lot of adjectives to describe how you felt. And you've just done that again in that first answer now. Do you remember that moment when you did get that job promotion, presumably that job change from being a reporter where you're all about asking the questions, to the position where you were in the financials? It was about strategy. Do you remember the sensation of that job change and any nerves that must have gone along with it?
Yeah, I absolutely do. And I think there were two stages for that. One of them was when I moved from being a journalist to being effectively an editorial, but I moved to being the first digital editor for Stuff. It was the first time that position had been created for the company. And it was very much at that time, which is about, maybe 13 years ago, where Stuff existed, but it was still in its infancy. So that role was all about developing out that product, building a team, developing the future strategy of that product, and, having to learn a lot then about the kind of business drivers that would make a successful digital business. And, excuse me, we were all very much in the early days of that, across the country, no matter what industry you were in. So that was definitely a baptism by fire, but also an incredibly exciting time to be able to sort of have that creative input into developing something that was, ended up becoming a really central part of the whole company. But then the next, I think the most significant jump for me was when I moved out of editorial. I was the executive editor for the group, so I was part of the company executive working for Simon Tong, who as the CEO, and he left. So I, became the chief executive, and I was my boss at the time, Australian boss, Greg Highwood, who ran the whole company, Fairfax Media. He asked me to put my hand up for that, and I was like, well, if he's got the confidence to think I can do that, then I'm going to do it. And he was also someone who'd come through the editorial ranks of the business. So it was great to get that sort of perspective on how you learn to broaden out your leadership skills and to manage and run a business when you've only come through one of the technical functions within that business. But the key thing he said to me, and Simon Tong had said to me, and I've learned for myself, was the value of having good people around you is immeasurable. And as long as you have the right team who know their area really well and can work together, all the difficulties sort of fall away. And you can concentrate on that sort of leadership of the strategy of the wider company, and resting assured that the finances, the distribution, the printing, all those other things are looked after by the sort of really top people.
You kind of touched on it there, but when you had those two really big, effectively 2 or 3 really big jumps, and you did have to take that sort of, take a deep breath and say, I can do this. Obviously, your inherent confidence must have helped there, but what other tips could you give young leaders who have just been promoted into a position where they are feeling nervous? And I think there's that syndrome, phenomenon called fraud syndrome, where you don't necessarily believe that you should be in this role, but you've been given that role, so you clearly should be. What advice would you give?
I mean, I think, firstly, I would say, sometimes the biggest worry is actually taking the leap in the first place, thinking about whether you have the skills, you tick all the boxes, all the rest of it. And some really sound advice that was given to me earlier in my career, which I always come back to, was, you'll step into something that feels uncomfortable, frightening, challenging, but once you do that, your horizons open up again and you don't look back. And I found that to be true, and it's made every subsequent step forward easier to take, knowing that, taking that first big leap into leadership, it's so true. Your horizons do open up. You do see things in a different perspective, and nobody enters those roles with a perfect set of skills at all, and you sort of develop them. And to those who feel worried and nervous and suffer for that imposter syndrome, which I think we all have suffered at one point or another in our career, I certainly have, is, I've also come to learn that that's really common, and that you're not the only one feeling like that. Your colleagues will be, your peers, people who work in other companies. We all have those as sort of essential human qualities of sometimes having a lack of self-confidence, or, worrying about how others will perceive us or whether we're living up to their expectations. But I think when it comes down to it, most people are like that. There's not some super breed of humans who never feel those qualities when they're sort of progressing through their careers.
There might be 1 or 2, but they're very, very rare around the world, presumably. How about we reverse this and look at it now with everything you've learned through the course of your career? When you're looking at people who to shine a bit of a light on within your company, what do you look for? What are the top 3 qualities or characteristics that you might look for when you're about to ask somebody to move up to that next level?
Yeah, I think the kind of things I look for are people who, no matter what role they've been in or what level of the business, they kind of attract my interest, or, that kind of thinking about them as potential future leaders either is that underlying curiosity, or, wanting to be involved in things, want to be part of discussions, want to put their ideas forth, that sort of sense that they're never quite satisfied with something they've already done, that they're always a bit restless, they think they can do better. It might have been a project really well delivered, but they go, yeah, that was good, but actually next time I wish we'd done this or that. People who have great relationships with their colleagues or other parts of the business. They're not arrogant, they're kind of just collegial and want to work and learn. So that's the sort of things I look for. And then also, I look too for a bit of an underlying grittiness. What I don't look for is what's the education background, what qualifications necessary if they got. That's definitely part of particularly some roles, but it's actually more about their personal qualities and the qualities they've displayed once they're in the workforce and what they've contributed to the business.
Interesting. And how about you, when it comes, flipping it back around to yourself again, when you've been in a situation where some of your decisions, now you're the boss, you might get this a little bit less, but in these environments when you're possibly in a lower management level and it's a real contest of ideas and you're putting something out there and you make a decision, you might be in a position where you have to make a decision, but that's effectively challenged. And that can be quite threatening for some people. How do you deal with those challenges to decisions you have made?
Yeah, I actually really welcome those challenges. I think that's real important that people feel they can challenge the boss, their boss, or another boss, or challenge someone else in the group. Because if you don't have that, you get that sort of group think, you get that sense where something might go off the rails later on and everyone's like, oh yeah, we thought that was a bad idea, but no one spoke up. But to me, to be prepared to stand up and question and challenge, I think that goes back to my days as a journalist when that was all, an essential thing. That always leads to a better outcome for the business. And I have huge respect for people who are prepared to challenge, take the devil's advocate position, help you look at things from all angles. And then once we're settled on something, we go for it. But if it doesn't work out, or if it doesn't work out as well as we thought it might be, taking that time to kind of reflect and look back. So no blame for that at all. I think where I would, if there was ever a time to apportion blame, it's where there's an environment that people don't feel they can speak up and contribute their ideas. Otherwise, why have people there at all?
Absolutely. I mean, in the same vein, what's your take on the commonly discussed and talked about New Zealand tall poppy syndrome? Is that something you've put your head around? Does this exist? What's your take on it?
Look, I think it does exist in some. Yeah, I'm sure. I think it does exist out there. I don't know if it's a specifically New Zealand thing, but I think it does kind of link back to that New Zealand sort of. Society where we consider everyone to be sort of equal and no one's special on a pedestal. And sometimes that manifests itself into people who've had amazing accomplishments, people looking for that thing that can level them down again. I try and ignore. I don't really feel like I've personally experienced that too much. Maybe it happens around the place, but in our organisation, which is built around journalism, where journalists are interviewing people from all walks of life and trying to get what they, get what kind of perspective there is there. I certainly don't pick up any, sense that they just want to shoot down the tall poppies. We wouldn't tolerate that from our journalists and our journalism anyway. And, so if people are experiencing that out there, I guess you just shrug your shoulders and go on.
It's been speaking of challenges, it's been an extraordinary year, obviously, with the lockdown and now just going into the second one now. It's interesting to catch you just as we're entering into this lockdown now. Obviously, with these big challenges this is an unusual year, perhaps not unprecedented, but it is an unusual year for sure. You would have been through a previous challenge, and the media industry, as we all know, has been challenging for the last 2 decades. What special advice do you have when it comes to confronting those bigger picture challenges as a leader?
Yeah, look, I think it's really important that, first of all, you're able to think about what you're going through the eyes of the people working in your organisation, and what they might be feeling, which obviously, as we all know from what we've been through this year, is extreme anxiety, uncertainty, fear. And I think we've had a taste of that in the media business more than a lot of other industries over the last many years, when we've faced huge disruption to our business model from the international rise of digital, but also have been able to see where opportunity lies. And so that's sort of advice I'd give too is, it's really easy to focus on the obstacles, but and the challenges and the fear, but at some point you have to also think about where is the opportunity for us there. And for us in news media, we say we entered the lockdown Mark 1, and every business was closed. So naturally our advertising revenue dried up. That's the advertising revenue that pays for all our journalists and everything. And on the other side of it though, the demand for our journalism was never higher. Stuff which already reached maybe 1.3 million people a day, doubled that overnight and has kept that really high. Our newspaper subscriptions went up. So we had this kind of two-speed business where we could see there was a huge demand for the work we produced. So then we moved into this sort of mode of looking at where is the opportunity in that. If people are, rediscovering the value of journalism, how do we meet what they need and also find new commercial opportunities? And some of those things we've been really working hard on in the last, couple of months, and what will come to fruition. I think what we also set ourselves out to do early on is, we came through that first lockdown, but we made sure we looked at what was happening overseas, where trends were going, and tried to prepare ourselves as much as possible for going back into that situation rather than just building out of it. So, while we were, setting strategy and investing in things that we want to do, at the same time we were stabilising, preparing that if we did enter that position again, we would have the reserves and the kind of wherewithal to get through it. And I think the last thing I would say is that, just back to people, I think, in times of extreme stress, when you have to think about people's livelihoods are at risk or they perceive them at risk, you just have to treat people like adults and be extremely transparent. Don't try and spin the messages. Just be very open and upfront about where things are at, because I actually find that is a much better way to diffuse anxiety than people thinking that they're kind of but weasel words, you might be hiding something from them, and it builds it up. And it's something we certainly tried to do and have tried to do that I think staff responded to really well.
I was going to leave the sort of wellness and people question to the last, but I'll pop it in now, just coming off the back of what you've said. But obviously, you're clearly a people person, and the whole takeover of stuff. Obviously, we've seen, everyone would have noticed that you're really putting your staff first. I mean, we've got the stakeholder investment process. I'm sure you're trying to get your head around and work out how that will roll out. Fascinating process. But aside from just the ownership of the company, you've asked your staff to take a pay cut during the first lockdown. You took an even larger one yourself. How do you bring people along in these tough times when they're feeling stressed? And obviously wellness is a big issue we're all trying to focus on. Obviously a lot of people watching this will be in the early stages of making these types of tough calls, these tough decisions. How do you cope with that?
Look, I think thinking back, reflecting on that first lockdown, there was just so much going on, and you remember how uncertain everybody felt about, we didn't know what each day would bring. We were managing the business day by day for cash, and we had on one hand an owner who didn't want to own us, so we couldn't count on them backing us up. They wanted to get out of New Zealand as quickly as possible. On the other hand, that proved to be an opportunity for me and the staff to kind of take the business and to actually get rid of a lot of that uncertainty and fear. But I think, the best way to bring people along with you is to be as transparent and open as you possibly can, to front up. I found just doing the kind of all staff Zoom calls was really well. Everyone could ask you whatever went really well, but people could ask questions all the time. I answered anything I knew the answer to. And it was mostly around things like job cuts or, what's ahead. I just talked to people. Like many businesses, we ask staff to take a voluntary pay cut, and we frame that in a way that this is about helping the business get through, where we all would take a little bit of personal pain for that kind of collective gain coming out the other end. And when I felt really moved actually about how many staff were prepared to do that, given their own fear and uncertainty about their individual jobs. And that was material in helping us get through. So we were able to stop that pay cut process after a month. We'd originally asked for 3 months when revenue started to come back. And then, one of the best moments for me so far was in this new ownership plan was a couple of weeks ago when we were able to tell staff we would be paying them back the money they had sacrificed. Because I always felt like, even though we didn't say that at the time, I always felt like that was on loan to us and that it wouldn't be right to just kind of carry on and not make an effort to return that. And that has, I think those kind of things have all built a kind of collective sense of pride and ownership in what we're doing, and confidence too that we're sort of coming into a position of stabilisation and hopefully growth.
And just to wrap it up, I just wanted to touch on the sort of generational divide, potentially divide issues. I mean, obviously we're, Generation Z, those born after 1995, well into the workforce now. For those of us from a slightly older generation, I think it's fair to say there are kind of different, there's not clear boundaries as to when it stops and starts, obviously, but there is possibly a different approach to the work environment, different work philosophies, different ethos in some ways. How do you bridge some of these gaps between the generations, if you see that, and time with something that I love that you said that I saw, where you're all about creating an internal environment where your staff can connect and flourish. And how do you do that with so many generations now in the workforce?
Look, I think, we have, our oldest staff member would be in their 70s, and then we have right down to, I'm sure we've probably got a few staff in their late teens sort of around the place. You definitely see that generational divide, but I think I haven't noticed a real particular friction around it. And to be honest, if there is, it's probably from the older generations adapting to this, the new generations. What I would say is that when I look at the young ones coming through, either journalists or in product or different parts of the business, I'm just blown away by what an amazing generation they are. They are faced with huge issues that, generations like mine and above have left for them to deal with, but they are so smart and tolerant, open to ideas and things like that. And I think the best we can do is try and share with them the lessons we've all learnt through years, but encourage them to kind of really, contribute and fly. And I think one thing I do worry about, because we do see it starting to manifest itself in the reaction to our journalists out there, is this global shift towards shutting down of dissent or ideas. And we're a business that, is built around free speech and opinions as well as journalism. And so that's something we really try and concentrate on for our younger staff, is to not let themselves be drawn into that or feel fearful of sharing opinions or ideas that are contrary to the prevailing ones of the time, which I think is a very dangerous path to go to when you can't speak or challenge an idea that is the trend of that particular era. So I think that's probably one thing we as older generations is super important for us to do. That younger generation is to focus on about the freedom of speech and freedom of opinion, and how important it is to express and consider different ideas.
And you touched on there finally, and you touched on it in the abstract, but I'd like to press you on it. You just said then you think it's important for older generations to pass on what they've learned. What would be the one, possibly two or three, what would be the best piece of advice you could, from everything you've learned now, that you could tell your younger self or the equivalent entering the workforce and positions of management now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that even to my younger self, and the young ones who are coming through today are way more confident and creative and amazing than I was. But I would say, don't sweat the small stuff. Be really open to the opportunities that come along. Take risks. It's always worth it. And put yourself forward to try new things or to be part of new projects, even if they're outside your comfort zone. But also that you leave university or school thinking that whatever qualifications or degree you might have come up with, that sets your path for life. That's absolutely not the case. You can become what you want and who you want, and as you enter the workforce, you start to discover that the opportunities that open to you will depend far more on your personal approach and the way that you work and your ability to, put yourself forward and learn. So that's my advice. Keep learning and take some risks.
Some wonderful words there from Sinead, and clearly someone who is constantly striving to put into action the leadership lessons she's learnt over her own experience of stepping up into new roles with new responsibilities over the course of her career. We thank Sinead for agreeing to talk with us, and also for Stuff's role as the key media partner for this IMNZ Leadership Series. Now, before I sign off, don't forget to try the networking opportunities by clicking the networking icon at the bottom of your screen on the left, and also check out the poll questions and results on the right-hand top side of your screen. And in response to many of your questions, yes, today's webinar has been recorded and will be sent out to everyone who registered over the next couple of days. And so for me, thank you for listening to what has been an inspiring morning of presentations and Q&As. A reminder that we'll have one more leadership webinar next week at the same time and same place. One of the big highlights will be a presentation from Campbell Barry. He's New Zealand's youngest mayor of Hutt City. A link to that is in the main reception tab on the left of your screen. So see you then. Ka kite anō.